back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us on this Monday. You see, we're talking about the history of the Confederate flag. Could also be the controversy over the Confederate flag, most recently spiking, of course, after the horrendous murders in Charleston, South Carolina at the African American Church. With us this morning talking about it, we have Gene Andrews, Sons of Confederate Veterans. Nice to have you on, sir, this morning. And also with us, Matthew Walker, one of the original freedom riders, a civil rights advocate. A pleasure to have you on as well, sir. Thank you both for coming on.
Could I clarify one thing?
Please do.
I'm not an actual Confederate veteran. I'm old, but I'm not that old.
I didn't think you were that old.
Okay.
Okay.
I
No
get that question
You
at
both have
school
been around a while, but neither one. Okay, fair enough. Let's take another few phone calls because a lot of people want to touch bases with you guys. And we'll go to Joe. Joe, good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Hey, Joe.
Just a comment. If this kind of stuff, this flap over the Confederate flag and the riots and stuff that went on and burnings and loot and stuff, all of this stuff, this continues to divide. It's not making race relations any better. It's making race relations worse. If this stuff continues on, things are not going to get any better.
I wonder what he says on that. I think we both are pretty clear on where you two stand on this issue. But is there room to maybe compromise on either side? Because I think just eliminating the Confederate flag completely, which I don't think is going to happen, but if it did, that would alienate an awful lot of people. Absolutely. It would upset you. But on the other hand, just allowing it to be everywhere is going to be very offensive to folks like him. So is there any middle ground here, or do you see a way to compromise to get along here, or is there not one?
Everyone in America has the right to be offended. And whatever your issue is, you can be offended by someone else's viewpoint, and in most cases people are, no matter what it is, whether it's on the Supreme Court ruling on the gay marriage. That offended a lot of people, made a lot of people happy, but that offended a lot of people. The Supreme Court ruling on the legality of Obamacare offended a lot of people, but it made a lot of people happy. So there's no issue today that isn't going to offend somebody somewhere. That's just
so in your mind, no real compromise. It should be the way it is.
Yes.
Nothing.
And they're talking about the license plate. And, you know, the Sons of Confederate Veterans, after quite a few years' struggle, finally got a license plate. Okay, if you don't like that, don't buy it. It's not the Tennessee license plate. You have to pay extra money to get that license plate, and then that money goes back to the state of Tennessee. Part of that extra, I think it's $35, is split. The state gets it.
Something like
and then we turn around and take part of our cut out of that and turn it back over to the state museum. But if you don't want to have that license plate on your car, I would understand that. I wouldn't require you to have that.
Mr. Walker, what do you think about my question about is there a compromise? He doesn't seem to think there really is, that everyone has a right to be offended, but is this different in your mind?
Well, when we come upon issues where there are opposing sides, we customarily like to think about a compromise as a solution to the differences between the two parties. But it's not always the case that a compromise would be the best outcome. It could also be the case that these differing parties have agreed to continue talking about the problem to the extent that they can find a way to more or less come up with a solution that people could live with.
What would you be satisfied with? What do you want to see happen?
Well, what I want to see happen is, number one, continued dialogue about this issue, because as I said at the outset, I think this might be, in addition to a major tragedy, a major opportunity for America to reassess its attitude toward this particular part of our history, which many Americans so conveniently like to ignore. This could be a chance for us to revisit the whole question of slavery, the meaning of slavery in terms of the problems we have in this country today, how the heritage and legacy of slavery is still alive and affects the way that people of different races look at each other. And I believe that since we have this opportunity to revisit these issues, we should make the most out of it as far as making America live up to its founding ideals. I am encouraged by the fact that Mr. Andrews' organization, the Sons of Confederate Veterans, continues to diminish in numbers. Their growth is negative at this point and has been for some time, and this indicates to me that people who had felt it necessary to glorify the Confederate States and the Civil War are from the Confederate side have become more educated, have become more enlightened, and do not feel it's so much a necessary thing to say that they need to defend Southern history, and maybe becoming more enlightened in terms of the fact that America is for all people and not just for those people who have traditionally been on top.
Mr. Walker is in error there. I'd like to help him out and correct that. I was down at SCV headquarters last week. They've had to bring in extra people to take the applications coming in as a reaction to this hysteria in the media over the flag. I would advise supporters not to call the SCV headquarters trying to get Confederate flags. They sold out. Our suppliers in Georgia and Alabama, they're 2 to 3 weeks behind. This is the reaction to Ms. Clinton's denunciation of the flag, and our local politicians, and some of the idiotic things that these politicians have come up with. I never had a very high opinion of politicians, but it's gotten even lower this time around, and some of the things that have been said. I know they enjoy sticking their face out in front of the camera and being on TV, but history they are sorely lacking in, taking advantage of this situation, this horrific thing that happened to these people in South Carolina to further their political agenda is really in poor taste, I think. But their motto is, never let a good tragedy go to waste.
Well, you can politicize anything, unfortunately.
Yep.
Let's go to Cindy. Cindy, good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Cindy. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm very proud of all my, well, I had 3 great-grandfathers that fought and were leaders of the Confederates. I also had a lot of uncles. I've even had some of them who had died during this war. But I've also was educated with my cousin, who is a very, he's been a member of the Son of Confederate Veterans for 20 years. And I'm very proud of all the history of them, because I'm very proud of what my family did for me to be here. But actually, I hope you can ask this gentleman who's there that there were a lot, that we have some members that are blacks who fought for the Confederate, and they had slaves. They owned their own plantations, so they had their own slaves.
All right.
And that is the God's truth. There is some black SCV members, and why would there be if they didn't fight with the Confederates?
Now, you have to be. You have to have a direct link to a Confederate ancestor. Mr. Nelson Winbush from Florida is one of our most esteemed members. I've met him several times at the National Convention. An excellent gentleman. And there were blacks that served in the Confederate Army, not as teamsters or nurses or cooks, but combat troops. And you can prove that because after the war they got pensions from the southern states. And to get a pension, you had to be a combat soldier. And the pension records are here in the state archives in Tennessee and other southern states.
So Cindy clearly is talking about how she's proud of the legacy and her family, and I think this is simple. Now, when you hear about African Americans maybe serving as he just described, is that something you're proud of?
Am I proud of African Americans serving in the Confederacy? No, I don't see how any African American could be proud of African Americans fighting to preserve slavery. African Americans, just as any other ethnic group, have members who happen to have certain mental aberrations. And I believe it is the case that those blacks who fought for the Confederacy were examples of people whose mental compass had not been properly aligned. Now, it is true that there were some African Americans who owned slaves, and they may have seen it in their interest to fight to preserve slavery. But they were in the minority, and as I said, every ethnic group has outcast, has those people who turn their back on their own kind, and African Americans are no different. American history is full of examples of people who have gone against most of their own group.
Now, you know, one thing I was thinking about, trying to make comparisons and discussing and reading stuff, because I've been online checking a lot. You think about, have you heard the analogy with the Confederate flag and the Nazi flag? I mean, and what I'm saying is I know they represent different things, but in Germany, that is a part of their history. But you do not see the Nazi flag flying over, the government buildings there, even though it's part of it. And there may be some there who recognize it as the history, and maybe some even still, support fascism. But I mean, you make the analogy of, well, it's history, and we're some proud of it. I'm just asking you this.
That's one of the idiotic things that keeps popping up. They throw
Why is it that different?
Nazism at the Confederate flag.
Well, I'm not saying they represent completely different things.
Well, that's what they try to do. That's what they, in the dumbing down of the American public, that's what they try to throw out there, that the Confederate flag and the Nazi flag are equal and so forth and so on.
I'm just saying they both
different.
represented a history, a part of a history of a country, and you don't see them, flying that flag in Germany over the government buildings there.
If you go to Germany and you question certain things about German history, they throw you in jail over there. You cannot have an open discussion about German history. Is that what we want in this country? Is that what Mr. Walker wants in this country? You can't do that. Ernst Zundel spent 5 years in jail, well, 3 years in jail in Canada, and then 5 years in jail in Germany for questioning German history. If they have a set program, set rules, the only things you can mention about German history. And if you vary outside of that, you're going in the slammer. They tried to get David Irwin, the English historian.
There may be controversy, but Germany is, it's
so if you want
not
to compare, if you want to compare anything to the Nazi flag, I would say compare Abraham Lincoln to the Nazi flag, because Lincoln was guilty of 4 out of the 5 charges that got German officers and Nazi political leaders convicted at the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal at the end of World War II. He was guilty of 4 out of the 5 of those. As far as an offensive war, war against civilians, torture, mutilation of prisoners of war, and genocide against a whole race of people. So if you want to compare the Nazi flag to any flag from that time period, why don't you compare it to Lincoln's U.S. flag?
Do you see any parallel there?
Between the Nazi flag and the Confederate flag? Well, for one thing, I think it should be pointed out that there is a major difference between the scope of the two periods in history. The period of slavery, the Middle Passage across the Atlantic, saw the loss of 50 million souls. We're talking about just the Middle Passage alone, not to mention the number of African Americans who were killed by the 8, 9 generations of genocide, homicide, the slavery in this country. The Holocaust took 6 million people during that period in German history. The American Holocaust, slavery, was far worse and more extensive than what happened with the Nazis. But fortunately, the Germans have lived up to their history and have banned the Nazi flag and have recognized the fact that they collectively were wrong in terms of Hitler's policies. Unfortunately, that type of thing has not happened in this country. There is no doubt about it. Slavery was wrong, but America hasn't recognized that to this day. And it is unfortunate that it's possible to still fly the Confederate flag in cases of state flags, public buildings, and so forth, and there is no law against it. It's, as I said earlier, a question of flaunting the fact that those people got away with tremendous crimes over an extended period of time.
We have to take a quick break on that note and be back with our final segment. More comments from both of our esteemed guests as well as some of your phone calls right after this. Stay with us.